Okay. So homework recap, as usual, right? The order that you should implement this homework should be top down. And when you get blocked by something, just do the simple way and come back later. Try to cover more stories, right? Don't try to take and spend too much time on one single story. So the first one, any question about this one? I think I already have the homework hint this time. So Ruby 3 homework hint. If you click on this, I actually implement the first part for you. For example, if someone like to have any upcoming, right? Of course, it's on the index, but the routes helper is as simple as that. By now, we are quite familiar with what folder you see in the routes. No, in the spec folder, right? You have spec, model, views, controller. They are the same folders they look exactly the same as apps, model, views, controller. But there are other ones like routes. Like routes. What are other? Let me just go back to this guy. What are some kind of tests you have? So in here you can have routes, controllers. What? Model, and then features, and then views. Anything else? Helpers. Anything else? Requests. Yeah. Now in Rails 5 make controller spec not as useful. But when you think of some of this, don't try to make things too complicated. Route test is quite obvious, right? Route test, you want to test some complicated routes. For example, maybe airline, website, and you have like a lot of params, and maybe something that you want to test, like go to /A/B/B/C. Sometimes it's not as easy, right? For example, routes. Let me just give some example of routes. Maybe you want to implement some news, and then it should look like this: Obama, visit, Ho Chi Minh City, right? But then sometimes you want this to also work. Vietnamese news, right? Obama visits, but then it may also be, right? Obama thăm Saigon, right? Some crazy stuff, and you want it to. As you implement it, think about the route first. Really help your cases. So now, controller tests. If you do look at controller tests, you should not think anything. It should not know anything about models or views. So keep something really simple. Unfortunately, it's not to be easy to be creative with this guy. So more like what status it renders. And I don't have good examples anymore because some of the examples I give now go into request spec. So if you research, this is preferred by Rails 5 because in the past, request spec were slow. So they tell you to write more controller tests. But now request specs are much faster than before, so it's okay. Requests actually test controller, route, and a little bit of views, right? However, to really test the view, then you need either view test, which does not use any in views test. Notice that it just look at that view file, and then it doesn't care about the partial, doesn't care about what the controller does. You just give it the variable and it render, right? Very basic stuff. So this is actually usually good for partial, right? Or basic view, right? Basic view page. Note like no layout. So I'm like, oh, where's my login link? Where's my sign out link? It's not there. But feature spec is useful when you want to create more complicated situation. You log in, you see this, you log out, you see that. Okay? Now, when to use what? Most of the time, model tests are easy to write, and I encourage you to write them, and it's easy to test, it's easy to try out in the Rails console. And also for feature tests, view tests, they can really be fragile. Like sometimes they break because you just change an element to something else, so it's unnecessary, right? The test is too rigid. So in the view, for example, I want to go to home page and I see, welcome, but then someone else, you test this, right? But then someone else add like, class name to it, and then it breaks. So that's not a very good test. But still, it's good right now, just to know the view tests tend to be, it breaks more easily, and sometimes you just replace the view with some other view files. Okay, so if you're still not sure, take another look at some of these in homework hints. Model test, quite straightforward. By now, you should know the syntax. rspec.describe, and then it describes, usually what it's trying to say here is, I don't care about any other class in Rails. Meaning I just care about the event class, which is the event model. And then here I just have some test cases, right? Describe, sometimes you see the word context. They are the same. And this grouping these tests under a certain situation, like a context. And we use the pound or the dot. Pound is for usually model test is good to make it very clear. This is the instance method, right? And dot is so in this case, I think I'm wrong. Upcoming, it should be a dot. Sorry about that, right? So it's testing this guy. If it's pound, it means it's like event.new.upcoming. It's an instance, okay? So some people ask, oh, it's so hard to do test-driven development. So here's an example. It is test-driven. As you can see, I just create a model. I know what method I need, but I don't know how to implement it yet. I don't care. So I just write some test cases. Right? It returns nothing, empty when there are no events, empty when there pass event. And then I run this test. I see, oh, there are 3 pending tests. That's okay. And then I add something where I expect some result. This is the behavior. And then you start with the first test. And it will fail saying this doesn't exist. No problem. Right? And then you add the method name. And then it passes the first one. So you work each case. So follow this. Hopefully it gives you an idea on how to do the test-driven for some model test. If you do test-driven for the entire app, then obviously sometimes you do outside in, you don't even know you need this upcoming thing. Then you write a feature test. As I click on this, I should see this, and then you go outside in, you will come up with some rule. But then that's really like, we should probably have a separate test course, right? That's a little bit much, but you can buy or download the RSpec book to read if you're interested. Now, when you seek data, right, focus on the ability to read. Don't focus on intelligent code, okay? So you see, I write things like that. I don't see that, oh, I repeat myself, so I have to put another variable. I want it to be extremely easy to read. I don't care that the code is like smart, right? Don't write smart code, just write easy to work with code. So in this case, I like to use create exclamation mark, because if it cannot create, it will crash, and that's okay because I want to have an event. You all know the create bang by now, right? And then you see that when this event model has so many validations, so I have to do a few things to make sure I can create. There are 2 ways for you to do this. One, you create just something enough, and then you save, but you say validate false. So you ignore those, you save anyways, you save an invalid object. That's okay, right? Sometimes new is enough. But in this case, I want this one load the database for my event, so I need to save them. So I choose to give enough data so it can save. Okay? But I'm tricking it right now. It's still invalid. You see, I don't want to create a venue. I don't want to create a category. I don't need. The database just has nothing. Just this, right? So I just say new here because it checks for this value venue before it's saved. It's actually better to validate by venue rather than validate venue underscore ID. This is just, it's better that way, and in this test, it's more flexible. I can, be lazy and do that. Okay? So, request test, like I say, you can Google a little bit more if you're curious. Prefer request spec, and this is how you generate them. Doesn't matter what you call it. They're just grouping them at different levels. So let's say I can call this a request that's called upcoming events if all the tests in this file is about upcoming events. But I want all the tests about events, so I just generate something that called events. And you see, a request test, you can still prepare some data in the database, right? But now you can visit a page and you can pass the param. So pretend you press the search button, right? And then it will submit to this page, and then there's a Scorpion string added to the URL. And because of that, I can test that, the page should render, and I should be able to see, this event title, but not the other event. So it's just some quick and dirty test. Okay. There's one more thing with view test. Be careful. It's actually a little strange. The generator is different from all the other generator. Rails generator helps you get some file setup faster, but don't be dependent on them. You just have to understand what it does. It's very basic. It just creates a file for you, right? So don't even, worry so much about, I have to learn all the syntax. If you don't, just Google it. But there's just a bit of trick here, right? Events folder, index view. See this? And when you do that, when you describe a type view, this has to be correct, because this is the only way Rails know to, actually, let me take it back. It's this one allows you to create the file this way, right? And RSpec always use your file name. Sometimes this is a bit funny. RSpec depends on the version. It uses this file name. It removes the spec part and try to run the thing over there. But sometimes it uses this stuff. That's enough. So just be aware. It's either this or this. Now notice the model. Where's the model test? Same idea, right? Now this may be enough because it will look into it just load the event model. It doesn't even need to go and check that file, right? But now in the view, you don't load the view until you test it. But this event is already loaded. Okay? And now raise your hand if you use device, and do this if you did not use device for homework. All right? If you did not use device, what did you do? What did you implement? You sign up yourself? Okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you have a question? Sorry, what's your name again? Phương. Right. Phương, did you have a question? Okay. I saw you raise your hand when I was talking about events. All right. Now, Factory Girl. There's a lot to learn, so just teaching it, just forcing too much. But again, if you see it in the homework, this is life, right? There are always something we don't understand. There are sometimes, some people can tell you not to worry about it, and then you can go to sleep happy, right? Sometimes, if you're not sure, just ask. But I'm okay if you don't understand Factory Girl at all. Now, Factory Girl, what it does is it helps you instead of writing this really long thing, it helps you write something shorter like this. With factory girl, okay, let me just write this note down here. With factory girls, this is how you set it up, right? You can even use Rails generator to set up, right, different factories. So what is the factory for? With factory girl, they usually write a library for Rails and then later they make it good enough for any Ruby framework. That's why now you require factory girl Rails, right? There's factory girl other things too. Now, instead of these, with factory girls, you can just define some files in spec, factories, events, and whatever you name them. It just load these files, right? And with them, then you can type something like factory girl.create event, and it will just load the logic. It will automatically create all the other fields because you don't care about them anyway, right? So if you care about the name, then you pass in the name. Factory girl make it simple to have some default. You can even create event and then you can name it like event 1, event 2, or use faker. Factory girl can take care of all of that for you. So if you're interested, read that up. Did I have that syntax in resources? Okay, I didn't have it. Now aspect matchers, most of the time we use just .eq stuff, right? Did you use any other? So you have like, okay, you have to route to. These are called matchers. Over time, you will have like, you know, the EQ is the most common one. But if you learn test more, you have to learn the extra matchers that may be useful for you. Very quickly, don't use should. Should is, if you started with Rails a long time ago, should is just beautiful to read, but it's quite buggy. Only in a language like Ruby can you do something like something should be something else because it's just so dynamic. But now people realize that it makes it very hard to maintain the code base. So people move to, you know, you should read why. Now if you join a company, you probably see should and then expect all mixed up together because people are all going to use expect now. EQ is better than B here because B is a very strict comparison, so they have to have the same, you know, object ID. So this is identity. But equivalent means, you know, if you compare two strings, then they are actually equivalent, right? But they're not exactly the same because they have different. They're stored in different places in memory. So that's why you have like equal question mark. You normally don't use that. You use the regular equal sign when you compare two strings. There's an extra thing that is like EQ here, so most of the time you don't use it, so you don't have to worry about it. There's a bit of, when you compare two floating number, it can be strange if you use, you know, equal. Actually, you have some weird behavior, like, oh, it may think this is 5.00001, this other guy's is 5.00001000001 because just comparing floating number is tricky. Now aspect, actually you can use EQ. Aspect is smart enough, I think, so you can do like it's compare within certain, you know, range. But if you want to be precise, you can do this, right? You, for example, you compare 10 with 10.1, then you can see, you know, say expect 10 to be within 0.1 of the other one. So you give it some room. So then 10.01 and 10.02, 10.03, they all considered equal. So read this, right? Just be, if you're curious more about how to write more expressive test. It means the test, when they fail, it reads like, you know, it reads more like English rather than only testing for true or false. Okay? Any more question about homework?
Can I use the factory girl inside the factory?
Yeah, absolutely. So factory girl it's really strange that some of these libraries are not. It's not as easy to find the syntax anymore. But Rails used to be so popular that it's easy to find, but I have problems getting what I want immediately. So we'll see. Now the good thing though, if you look hard enough, anything you face under the sun, probably people have already used. So for example, right, you see a factory file, it's like this. This is actually an older, it might be an older version. But if you just define a bunch of files, any Ruby file in the factory, you see that you can set up any default values for them, and you can override them when you do factory.create. They even make it easy for you to call create or build without the word factory because it's so common. You don't have to type the same thing, but in the test files. It's possible to use some block like this to create dynamic variables. And as you just asked, right, can you use another factory girl object in another? This is like this. An author is a user, but when you create a post factory, then you can either just put the word here or you use the long syntax. But as you can see, now there's a whole new world of language, a new language here for you to learn. Some people don't like it. Just create regular files that read like Ruby and just write Ruby to write your code. It's just better over time. That one doesn't change. Factory syntax will change. Oh my God, we have a fly. Okay, let's get to break time. Okay, that makes sense, right? So you see, it's cool. You can even use a different name for it. Any other questions about homework? So device, pretty much most of your projects, you guys will probably use device. Everyone uses it. It's easy to understand. There's a lot of device aspect, helper, and so these are the steps. Okay?
If we use device for future project, do we have to worry about security?
It will help with security because
if someone modify the code device.
No, you shouldn't have to worry about that. Yeah, I mean the community aspect of you, in general, we trust that pretty well. Yeah.
It seems like you use Rails.
It's the same, right? Yes. So they have the maintainer, and it's a very strong community. Okay. So for your project, then you can search for things like awesome Ruby website or Ruby toolbox. Right. So here, if you just think about, oh, what do I need? Authentication. Then you press enter. It gives you some other option here. Same thing, Ruby toolbox. You type something like that. For example, here it may have like, maybe you like tagging, right? So here's so many options for tagging, right? And same thing with tagging, comment. Now you can play with them. My recommendation is, right? You can see there's so many. My recommendation is usually if you can code it yourself, it's better. Unless someone provides something that is really clean, a lot of people use it. Feel free to use and try, right? But as you become better, never be afraid to build and test yourself. Just good enough for your use, and then later, 5 years later, it still works. 5 years later, if you use something that depends on this old version of Rails, some other version of device, and things can get pretty crazy. However, device is an example where it doesn't matter because it takes care of something really clear, right? User login, log out. So if you don't like device anymore, you just throw it out. You can use something else. But there's some other things like the commenting system, the tagging. There's so many of these gems that are so long and complicated, and people use too many dependencies in it. It may not be that useful. Okay. An example is that the impressionist gem some of you guys use, right? It's cool, but if you don't really need all the advanced functionality, then maybe it's better you build it yourself. Because let's see, I look at this gem file and I see it depends on For example, Nokogiri. Obviously, there's no choice. This is one of the most required gem. Rails cannot get rid of it because it parses XML, HTML, just compatible with different generations of format and browser. But this is one of the reasons that's like, it's one of the slow gem that's very difficult to install on different machines because it needs to compile C code. So if you use a new Ruby framework, and not Rails, but that framework doesn't use Nokogiri, if you include it, that framework actually uses something better, and now that framework actually doesn't like it because you're just adding too much bulk to your code. And sometimes it clashes and doesn't work. So the good thing is this gem is simple enough, just counting the view. It doesn't use many more gem. I'm glad he does that. But there's some gem that's just really crazy. Like for example, a lot of us use something like HTTP party to make HTTP requests. You can actually just use Ruby, the built-in library. But if you use it, and let's see what are the dependent gem. And it can be, this is not a good place to look at dependent gems. I'll show you a better one. And like multi-XML now, like this more and more parser. Example, the best way to look at the dependency is in runtime dependency is in this guy. So I guess it's not too bad. It's only one extra gem. Let's see device. Right? So there's a bit of other things, responders, like not really necessary. Over time it will be quite outdated. Bcrypt is fine, we know we need it, but some of these gems are not really required. Rails ties, this is obviously needed. That's the core of Rails. Okay, it means you can use device outside Rails as well. All right. Any other question about homework? We'll take a 5-minute break. I'm really sorry I brought food in here, so I need to finish that.